The following half-hour show is a paid political program and is not endorsed by this station, management, or staff.
The following program is sponsored by Excalibur Insurance Management Services.
We're pleased to bring you a special guest to this week's show. John Michael Mulvaney, who goes by his nickname, Mick, served as the Chief of Staff to the President of the United States, Donald J. Trump, making him one of the most powerful men in Washington, D.C. Mick Mulvaney has been at the forefront of United States economic policymaking and politics at the highest levels. In his tenure as Chief of Staff, he advised the President on politics and policy decisions, as well as meeting with world leaders, from Queen Elizabeth to North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. Mick also served as the Director of the Office of Management and Budget, affectionately known as OMB, devising, managing, and executing the President's budget and regulatory objectives. He also served as the Director of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. After his service in the Oval Office, he was appointed to serve as the United States Special Envoy to Northern Ireland. Prior to his work in the Trump cabinet, Mulvaney served as a United States Congressman himself from South Carolina, the 5th District. He was first elected in 2010, and he served in Congress until his resignation to join the Trump administration. With his colleagues in Congress, former Congressman and current Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, along with Congressmen Jim Jordan and Mark Meadows, he was a founding member of the Freedom Caucus. Mick began his political career in the South Carolina General Assembly, first in the House of Representatives and later in their Senate. He was born in Alexandria, Virginia, but grew up in Charlotte, North Carolina, before moving to South Carolina. After high school, he went to Georgetown University with a degree in international economics, commerce, and finance. While at Georgetown, he was an honors scholar of the School of Foreign Service, graduating with honors. He then went on to law school at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, earning his Juris Doctorate. He earned a full scholarship to attend law school. Mick currently serves as a political commentator for CBS News. And in that capacity, he enlightens people on a national level about politics, and we are very happy that he's going to do the same for Northeast and Central Pennsylvania today, as he will talk about his time in the Oval Office and his close proximity to the most powerful man in our country, the President, as well as his other service that makes him uniquely qualified to talk about a lot of the issues we face in America as we head to midterm elections this November.
This is the Volpe Report, a weekly news and political interview show examining the latest local, state, and national issues with Chuck Volpe. Insightful, informative, controversial, the area's premier political talk show, the Volpe Report.
Mick, welcome to the Volpe Report.
Good to be here. Thanks for having me.
When we have a national guest of your stature and your varied background, from the halls of the United States Congress to a founding member of the most important caucus in the middle teens of this new century, the Freedom Caucus, to a number of other things that we'll get onto today as well, you have unique expertise. You're uniquely qualified to talk about one of the most enigmatic presidencies of my lifetime. You have a group on one side that think he was the most brilliant man, a great leader, and did a lot of good things for our country. And then on the other side, he's been demonized as Satan himself. So you're probably a good person. So the first question I'd like you to expound on, Mick, is, talk about your time as the Chief of Staff to the President, President Donald Trump.
How much time have you got? I think we do a half-hour show. I can do that for 4 or 5 hours. I will. Listen, was it a powerful position? Sure. It depends on the day, right? Depends on the issue. But you're right. The Chief of Staff is in with the President every single day. The traditional role has been described as a gatekeeper, the person who sort of decides whether or not somebody gets in to see the President or doesn't. That varies from president to president. I've talked to chiefs of staff for Clinton and Bush and Obama, and every president is different, so every chief of staff is different. But I do have a story, which is that late one night, I worked from about 6 a.m. till about 8 p.m. which was most of the time that Donald Trump was awake. He never slept. He only slept about 4 hours a night.
Wow.
So I had to have a team that came in about noon and worked till 2 a.m. because he slept from about 2 till about 6. But late one night for me, which was 8 o'clock, I go in there and I'm like, look, boss, here's the deal. Nancy's not coming tomorrow because she's upset about one of your tweets. The two senators who are supposed to come in tomorrow left early to go to a fundraiser back home. The secretary of this and the secretary of that are fighting with each other, and they don't want to sit with each other on Air Force One tomorrow. There's Secret Services. There's a threat to one of your family members that we have to deal with, and the fence around the building is over budget and 6 months late. And he looks at me and goes, Mick, what exactly do you do around here? And I laughed and said, Mr. President, I'm the guy who tells you all the stuff you don't want to hear. And that's the role of the chief of staff. People have been critical of some of the things, not all, some of the things I've said on January 6th. I've said some things supportive of the president. I've said some things that are critical of the president. And the folks who are like, oh, I can't believe you're criticizing the president. I'm like, no, I'm calling him like I see them. And maybe you get fired. Maybe you do good service to a president by that. So that's the job. The job is being the one person who has to tell the president stuff he really doesn't want to hear because everybody else is afraid to do exactly that.
Could you kind of, briefly summarize your view of January 6th? So much has been written and said about it. I've had guests on this show that have kind of called it a Hollywood production witch hunt. And not that it isn't important what happened on January 6th, but the question that begs there in that scenario is we're in a bad state in America right now in terms of our energy abilities based on what they've done, the Biden administration. We have a record horrific economy that really is a recession, and your expertise as director of OMB we'll get to later in the show. But your comments are expert in that as well. But, they've kind of disavowed a lot of things, and questions have come up with our crime epidemic and other things. Why aren't we having committees on that to find out why and what spiked inflation? And so there's that side. And, of course, the other side of it, and this is mostly from the Democratic progressive side, is, wow, this is something we need to delve into. It was a threat to our democracy, our way of life. It's making its rounds in the fall campaign, of course, which says to me you don't have a lot else to talk about, and they don't, whether it's immigration, crime, public school policy, inflation, gas prices, energy. None of that's good for the Democrats right now, so they have to talk about things like that. So, again, back to January 6th. Your take on that and your view of the process.
Sure. And when you ask about January 6th, there's really a couple different things you're asking, which is, what about the day, what actually happened on the day? And then what about the committee, the January 6th committee? So let's talk about the committee to begin with. Let's be perfectly clear. This is a political thing. It's a political activity. It's done in Congress, which is a political body. They don't have any law enforcement capability. They're not supposed to. That's the division of power in our system, right? The executive branch enforces the laws, not Congress. So they don't have the ability to enforce the laws. This is a political investigation. Call it a witch hunt if you want to. I do that most of the time. It's designed to make the president look as bad as he possibly can. It's populated by people who really hate him, even though, yes, it's bipartisan technically because Liz Cheney is Republican and Adam Kinzinger is Republican. But, I mean, if they really thought that January 6th, the day, was the single greatest threat to the democracy of the United States in the last 150 years, do you think they would have taken a 6-week vacation, which is what they just did? Let's be perfectly clear. The last hearing, I think, was the end of July. The next hearing is next week. They took off 6 weeks. I don't know where they went. You don't know where they went. Did they work really, really hard in their offices all through August in Washington? Maybe. Did they go to the beach? Maybe. Did Liz Cheney go to Europe? I have no idea. But this is a political thing, and people need to realize that from the outset. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't get good information from it. I think some really interesting information has come from the January 6th committee, especially when it comes to the Republican witnesses. Bill Barr, for example, a two-time Republican, Senate-confirmed U.S. Attorney General, comes out and said, look, Trump lost the election. That gets my attention. I know Bill Barr. I don't think Bill Barr is a radical leftist progressive MSNBC commentator. Right. He is a Republican. And when he tells me that Trump lost the election, I sit up and I pay attention. And I wish more Republicans had watched the hearing, but they haven't done that. And that's fine. That's their business. So that's not to say there's not some not good things, but good information that has come from the January 6th committee. But you have to look at everything that comes out of that committee with a huge grain of salt, because this is designed first and foremost to make Donald Trump look bad. and to a lesser extent, make Liz Cheney look good because she desperately wants to be president and is running for president and is using the January 6th committee to do that. So, as is so often the case in Washington, I know it's a long answer and I apologize. So often the case in Washington, it's a bunch of different things at one time. Is it an investigation? Yes. Has decent information come out of it? Yes. But is it a political witch hunt? Yeah, it's designed to make Donald Trump look as bad as he possibly can. And that's why this committee exists.
I was reading polls about the level of watchers and polls about what do you think about the January 6 hearings in terms of substance. And Mick, you end up with well over 80% of all Americans, not just Republicans, in those polls either didn't tune in or when asked, do you think this will impact your voting in November or do you think this changes your view of this country? Between 80 and 90% said, no, it didn't. Priorities, I think it was James Carville, the famous Democratic strategist, said 30 years ago, it's the economy, stupid. And right now, despite all the other important issues this country faces, the economy is the elephant in the room we can no longer avoid. So, I just wanted to expound on your answer in those two areas that, I think they have undercut themselves.
And the last couple of days, I think this airs on Sunday. As you and I tape this, it's Friday, which means that, or Thursday, I lose track of the days, but the New York Attorney General lawsuit came out yesterday. And you read through it, and I've read through it, it's 223 pages long or something like that. And it looks like nothing more than something to try and get Letitia James reelected as the Attorney General of New York. It's a lawsuit saying that Donald Trump lied, and because he lied, he got lower interest rates, and then he paid off that interest and then paid off all of the debt. And everybody got everything they wanted, and nobody was harmed. So why are we doing this? And you can't help but get the feeling that it's politically motivated by the Democrat New York Attorney General. Just like you cannot but help get the feeling that the January 6th committee is there because Liz Cheney wants to be president and because the Democrats don't want to talk about the economy. They want to talk about Donald Trump. They think they have a chance. America is 50-50 split on Donald Trump. It's 95-5 against Joe Biden and the Democrats on the economy. Look, I guess I can't blame them in a roundabout sort of way. If I was faced with those same cards, I'm like, look, the last thing we could talk about the economy is because we're losing that and we're going to lose that. Let's find something else. Is Donald Trump a saint? No, none of us are, right? You mentioned earlier that, some people have deified him. That's not right. Is he the devil? Absolutely not. He's just like any other human being. He's done some stuff right, some stuff wrong. But these lawsuits, which seek to make him be a criminal, to make him be the devil, to make him be the worst person on the face of the planet, I think more and more people are starting to realize these are politically motivated and they're just designed to either knock him down, build up the Democrats, or both. And I think ordinary Americans, regular folks, can see that, whether it be close up or from a distance.
We're going to take a quick break, Mick, and come back. I want to talk about inflation, the economy, the administration's denial of the same, of the recession we're in a moment. This view deals with politics and the belief that science has become politicized, which is a prime reason many Americans don't trust it. I will now quote from an article by Andrew Follett, a research analyst in Washington, D.C., who had previously worked as the science reporter for the Daily Caller News Foundation. I quote, "The politicization of science is a result of two phenomena: a broad replication crisis in the social sciences and its intermixing with agenda pushing by militant ideologues. This means that an awful lot of research getting published is flat out false or inconclusive at best. According to a 2020 survey by the U.S. Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, DARPA, in 2009, 53.4% of social science papers had failed to replicate, meaning that efforts to reproduce their results had not succeeded. By 2018, that figure had risen to 55.8%. Flipping a coin would give you better odds of success," end quote. According to Mr. Follett, scientific experimenters seem to be massaging their results. By manipulating weak statistical methods and adding confirmation bias, creates outcomes the researchers desire. Confirmation bias is the favoring of results that supports one's desired outcomes and downplays or discards those that don't, which have the effect of lowering standards while increasing chosen outcomes. The marriage between social scientists and the political left have combined to create an environment for academic fields of a questionable nature. These fields include identity and gender studies, whiteness studies, critical race studies, and the like. I am now going to quote Mr. Follett again. Begin quote. The problem of irreproducible results is worsened by biased experimenters who torture the evidence until it confesses whatever their ideological commitments demand. This could explain why the replication crisis is getting worse as the left-wing echo chamber of academia becomes more politically extreme, and experimenters find creative new ways to spin evidence into confirming their preconceptions, end quote. So if you are wondering why we are hearing, all of a sudden, about cultural issues like critical race theory, gender identification, pronoun police, and white privilege from academia, now you know. But you should also know they should not be given credibility just because someone has PhD in front of their name. Welcome back, Mick. Let's now turn our attention that you also held another exalted position in our government, not quite chief of staff, but important nonetheless, especially with what's going on. You are director of the United States Office of Management and Budget, referred to as OMB. Everybody that follows even economics a little bit understands the importance of that office. So you were the director there as well. You're in a uniquely qualified expert position to talk about what's going on. So to kind of lay the foundation, the lawyer in me for the question is this. We have record inflation. Our economy is the worst it's been in 40 years. The Fed, we're taping this show on Thursday. The Fed, the show will air, of course, a few days from now. The Fed just raised rates, as I know you're aware, another 75 basis points. It was when they did it in a few months ago, they raised it 75 basis points. It was the highest raise in 30 years, 3 months ago. Now they just did it again, another 75 basis points and hint for more. How do you keep spending and keep raising interest rates at the same time? Please tell me we're not going over a cliff, but all yours.
I don't know if I can tell you that, but I can tell you sort of the general lay of the land, which is if you go back, and I'm old enough, I'm not as old as I look, but I'm much older than I feel. I remember interest rates in the 12, 14, 16% levels in the late 1970s, early 1980s. And when Reagan was president, and I was a young man, he went on TV and said, look, inflation is too much money chasing too few goods, okay? That resonated with me. It still resonates with me to this day, and it's a good way to look at the circumstances we're in. Why do we have inflation? Well, for a couple of different reasons, but one of the big ones is we gave people a bunch of money during COVID to not make anything. And we did that for a reason. And I get that. But when you give people a bunch of money and they don't make any more things, then you have more money chasing the same number of goods. And that by itself will raise prices, and that's inflation. Then you add to that the supply chain difficulties that we had during COVID. And later on, but not at the beginning, later on, you had the Ukraine war, which also made it more difficult to get goods to markets. Now you have more money and fewer goods. And that is a formula for inflation. There's a couple different ways, in fact, two, to fix that. Number one, you could get rid of the money. And this is what the Fed is trying to do. They're raising rates that tries to sop up money. It's what's called, what economists call demand destruction, which is an economic term for a recession. It simply makes it to the point where you're afraid to spend money because you're afraid you're going to run out. So you don't buy that extra tank of gas. You don't go on vacation. You don't buy a new car because you're afraid you don't have enough money to do it. That's demand destruction. That's one side of the equation. And that's where the Fed is looking. To your point, the Democrat-controlled Congress is doing the exact opposite at the same time, which is they're trying to pump more money into the system. So every time the Fed comes to try and take $1 out of the bathtub, in an analogy, the Democrat Congress is pouring another $1 in. So the work that the Federal Reserve is doing doesn't have much impact. The side of the equation that doesn't get nearly enough attention, and they got all the attention in the whole world under the Trump administration, was the supply side, the supply of goods and services. And we proved, I think one of the great successes of the Trump administration was that we proved once and for all, even more so than Reagan, that you could have full employment, increasing wages, you could have economic growth without inflation because we were making more things. That's what we call about supply side economics. We made it easier and more profitable to make stuff specifically in this country. So when you've got more money, like we had, you had more goods. So you didn't have more money chasing fewer goods. You had more money chasing more goods, and we had no inflation. Nowadays, because the government is running the printing press, running these debts, you have more money chasing fewer goods because of the way that this government has handled not only its policies overseas and its policies in the war in Ukraine and so forth, but also its regulatory policy and tax policy and make it harder to get stuff to market. So we prove supply side economics works. I think the Biden administration is proving for us that supply side economics works as well. They just refuse to do it. They are relying on the Fed to fix a problem that they created.
Agreed. I've used a more simplistic analogy on this show and in some of my views. You've heard the story about the couple that is overwhelmed with credit card debt, and they're getting crushed by it. They're revolving credit, they're getting killed. So when they go to experts to get out of that debt, it's really a simple solution. They say, take every one of your credit cards out of your wallet and cut them and throw them in the garbage. Because you can't keep spending while you're getting out of one hole, you're digging another one already. It's common sense. Well, I liken to what's going on in our country right now, Mick, that. You've talked about the things they're trying to do, and pain is being inflicted by the Fed and the raising of rates to slow down the demand, to your point. But the Democrats in Congress and this administration are pouring hundreds of billions into it, so there's no end in sight to me. What do you do then when you're going to have so much money and even fewer goods and services getting chased? Well, as I said, it's bad. And my view is that when the dust settles, I think the American people understand that, and their focus will be on November the 8th on those issues. They always come down to pocketbook issues if everything I've ever read my whole life is true. But your take on that? Does it come down to that?
I think folks, vote for their own enlightened self-interest. And if they think that voting for Democrats is better for their family, they'll vote for Democrats. If they think that voting for Republicans is better for their family, they'll vote Republicans. And I think the Republicans are just uniquely situated right now. It's been rare, I think, to have the type of contrasts between the two parties that you see right now. I ran for office for the first time in the Tea Party in 2010 when I ran and won for Congress. It's the first Republican in my seat in like 130 years. I didn't think you could draw more contrast between the parties than you could in 2010. And here I am today going, my goodness gracious, the divide between the two is even larger. That Republicans are the ones talking about fixing inflation by reducing government spending and making more things. This makes sense to me. Democrats are talking about reducing inflation by spending more money and having the Fed raise interest rates. That's outrageous. It's going to cost your family hundreds, if not thousands of dollars more to do things like buy a car or buy a home. It's almost counterintuitive what the Democrats are doing. Then you move into the other policies like crime and law enforcement and so forth, border control. And the parties are so far apart right now. And the Democrats are so far left. I cannot tell you the number of my Democrat friends that I have, and don't believe what anybody tells you in Washington, D.C. Anybody who's any good at the job in Washington and takes it seriously has friends on both sides of the aisle. You just do. It's only the nut jobs that don't have any friends on the other side of the aisle. And my Democrat friends are telling me they're not really sure where their party is going with this. Okay, open borders and defund the police and spending huge amounts of money into an inflationary cycle. That's the type of thing where the tail is wagging the dog in the Democrat Party. Look, we have our challenges in my party, and I get that. We've always had, both parties do. When you have a country of 300 million people and you only have two parties, you're going to get factions within that. But right now, that progressive left-wing socialist wing of the Democrat Party is the ascendant energy in that party, and they are producing policies that I don't get, and I don't understand why anybody votes for them, because I don't understand how you can support not having abortion. Listen, I'm pro-immigration. I'm a pro-Republican, pro-immigration Republican. But to be for open borders like they are, to defund the police like they are, to be for spending money when inflation is, I don't get it. But at the end of the day, the voters are going to have their say in about 6 weeks.
Yeah. Well, that begs the question, the follow-up to that, Mick. Talk about your view of the future of the Republican Party. You obviously served the president, former President Donald Trump, chief of staff. You're good friends with Ron DeSantis and other key Republican players. What's the future of the Republican Party? My humble opinion is in 2024, the presidency is theirs to lose. But having said that, they can lose it. Pennsylvania, I think, had a misstep, and their nominee for governor, pretty far right. I'm not sure he can get enough votes to beat the Democrat, Josh Shapiro. But take us through that. Do it, if you would, an opinion analysis of where you think the Republican Party should go and where it is going.
Yeah, listen, I'm really excited about the future of my party, the Republican Party, for a variety of reasons. The most basic is that, generally speaking, we are still a meritocracy, and how long you've been in government doesn't necessarily impact where you are in the party. And our bench is extraordinarily strong. You mentioned Ron DeSantis, who I served with in Congress and started the Freedom Caucus with. He's a great leader. He's being discussed for higher office, President of the United States, for the exact right reasons, which is that he's done a great job in a large state as a governor during trying circumstances such as COVID. He's a great member of our bench. Tim Scott, the African-American senator from my home state of South Carolina, another true leader and one of the nicest, most genuinely nice human beings you're going to ever meet. If the country is interested in healing and uniting itself, they're going to look to Tim Scott for leadership in the future. Nikki Haley is from my home state. Kristi Noem was from my home state. Mike Pompeo and I served together in Congress. Mike Pence was the vice president. We served together in Congress. You go down the whole list. Interestingly, these folks are all about my age. This is the next generation in our party. Donald Trump may run again. I can't stop him from doing that. I happen to think he's best served, and the country is best served by him sitting back and becoming the elder statesman and the leader of the party and letting the younger generation take over. But that's not my call. That's his. But I'm generally optimistic because we encourage people to move up the ranks based upon their ability. The Democrats encourage people to move up the ranks based upon their tenure. It's more of a university system. Nancy Pelosi's over 80. Steny Hoyer's over 80. Jim Clyburn, the number 3 Democrat in the House, is over 80. And they have their positions not because they're the best at it, but because they've been there the longest. And I think at the end of the day, that system breaks down and the young Democrat talent leaves. And in fact, the Democrat bench is very, very narrow. You have a very progressive liberal Democrat in California, Gavin Newsom, a very progressive liberal Democrat in Illinois, in Pritzker. I think really the best candidate they have is a gay Jewish man, governor of Colorado, Jared Polis, who's, again, my age and a progressive, but a really, really smart guy. But the bench for the Democrats is really short. By the way, the next person on the list for the Democrats is Hillary Clinton, which is saying something about the weakness of the Democrat bench, and Kamala Harris, who is just as weak. And I don't think even the Democrats see her as a potential presidential candidate. So if you ask me, the future of the parties right now, I think not only are our policies better than theirs, but I should think that. I'm a Republican, right? I know most of the players. I know the folks on both sides, and they've got some good ones. Jared Polis is really good, as I say. But I would put our bench up against their bench every single day. And if Donald Trump wanted to sit back and say, you know what, I've done it. I'm going to be the senior statesman. I'm going to be the guy who sort of directs the party, and I'm going to find the next young leader in this party. We've got such a solid bench and a solid group of men and women to choose from. By the way, all those folks that listen to the Democrat side, they're all men, by the way. And we have Kristi Noem and Nikki Haley and Tim Scott, who's an African American. So we've got that type of diversity on our bench. So I'm optimistic long-term about our party. And for that reason, I'm optimistic long-term about the country.
Thank you, Mick, so much for your time. And I know the folks of all of Northeast and Central Pennsylvania are smarter for having heard you. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
Thanks.